The hall of the Vorkal Dominion was built to break spirits. Yet tonight it felt like it was holding its breath. Cold blue lights glowed across the towering obsidian pillars as hundreds of alien soldiers surrounded a single figure. Each pair of eyes locked on him with disgust, fury, and curiosity. That figure was Rylan Ward, a captured human soldier covered in dust and dried blood, his hands chained behind his back, his steps slow but steady as two guards pushed him forward. Every other species in the galaxy feared this place. But humans had a reputation for being stubborn, reckless, and unpredictable, and Rylan seemed carved from those rumors. He was dragged toward the center of the throne chamber where Princess Zirathel, the cruel and brilliant heir of the Dominion, stood waiting with a creature that made the walls tremble with every breath. The creature was called Vorgath, a hulking monster shaped from bone, shadow, and engineered rage, its white armored plates glowing with faint red cracks like molten veins. Every prisoner brought before the princess had cried at the sight of that beast. Some fainted before it even moved. But tonight something different happened. When the chains were removed from Rylan's hands and he was shoved to his knees, he looked up, not at the princess, not at the soldiers, but straight into the glowing red eyes of Vorgath, and he didn't blink. Not once. The chamber fell silent as if the entire Dominion was pausing to witness this strange moment. Princess Zirathel finally stepped forward, her tall figure wrapped in obsidian armor, her silver blue hair flowing like living mist behind her, her voice sharp with authority as she leaned closer to Rylan and spoke. "Human, are you not afraid?" Her tone carried amusement, disbelief, and a touch of insult, but Rylan didn't answer. He simply lifted his chin and kept his gaze locked on the monster. Vorgath growled, a deep rolling sound that vibrated through the air like thunder trapped inside a cave. Yet Rylan still showed no fear, not even a twitch. The princess narrowed her eyes, her voice echoing through the hall as she stepped aside and let the full height of the beast tower over the human. "My monster lives to devour on my command," she said. "One word from me, and you will die in its jaws." Rylan finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear, strangely calm for someone with a 7-meter predator standing above him. "If you wanted me dead," he said, "you wouldn't be wasting your words," the soldiers gasped, some lifting their weapons in anger. But the princess raised her hand and silenced them instantly. She studied him with a confusion she tried to hide, because no human should have been this calm. No prisoner should have held their voice steady in the face of certain death. She circled him slowly, watching him from every angle, trying to understand the riddle sitting in front of her. "You do not understand your position, human," she said softly. "You are nothing here." Rylan didn't look at her, his eyes still focused on Vorgath as if analyzing something invisible, something deeper than flesh or fear. "I understand enough," he replied. "I understand that your monster won't touch me." The princess laughed, loud and sharp, a sound that bounced across the pillars like shattered glass. "Won't touch you?" she repeated. "You believe a beast born only for war, a creature engineered to kill anything I point at, will refuse my order." She snapped her fingers, a command that usually made Vorgath lunge forward instantly. But this time the beast froze, its breath quickened, its claws pressed against the floor, its muscles flexed as if preparing to attack. Yet it did not move any closer to Rylan. It roared in frustration, shaking its head violently, trying to obey. But something held it back like an invisible chain. The hall erupted in shock, murmurs racing across the chamber like sparks. No one in Dominion history had ever seen Vorgath hesitate. The princess's amusement faded, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. Curiosity. She stepped between Rylan and the beast, her eyes burning with questions she had never asked in her life. "What are you?" she whispered. Rylan didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't show pride or fear or arrogance. He simply breathed slowly and said, "I'm human." But the way he said it made the entire room feel smaller, as if that simple word carried something heavier than chains, heavier than empires, heavier than the monster that wanted to tear him apart. Princess Zirathel leaned closer, her voice barely audible now. "Why aren't you trembling?" Rylan's answer was quiet, almost gentle. "I've faced worse." A strange chill swept through the hall, as if fate itself was shifting its weight. Vorgath growled again, confused, unsettled, almost afraid. And for the first time in her life, the princess felt a ripple of doubt move through her heart. This human was not normal, not weak, not predictable, and not trembling and deep inside her. A dangerous thought began to take shape. This human might change everything. The princess tests the human. The guards dragged Rylan away from the throne chamber with tight grips on his arms. But even as they pulled him across the polished black floor, he kept his eyes locked on Princess Zirathel, and she kept her gaze locked on him, their silent standoff burning through the air until the hall doors slammed shut between them. Rylan didn't resist the guards. His steps steady, his breathing controlled, his mind calm in a way that felt unnatural even to himself, but the silence around him was thick with fear. Because every alien soldier who marched beside him kept glancing at him as though he carried a hidden weapon they couldn't see. The corridors twisted like veins through the massive Dominion Palace, glowing with cold blue light as shadows danced across the steel walls. And every step echoed with the same question that now lived inside the princess's mind. Why hadn't the human trembled? The guards pushed Rylan into a circular chamber filled with strange alien machines that hummed with soft pulses of purple energy. The room cold enough that his breath left faint white trails in the air, chains hooked around his wrists again, binding him to a metal column at the center of the room. He didn't speak. He didn't fight. He simply watched the guards leave and waited in the cold silence, his eyes studying every detail of the strange room like he was mapping it in his head. Minutes passed like slow, heavy waves until the door slid open again, and Princess Zirathel walked inside alone. Her steps calm, her expression unreadable, her eyes sharp with something between fascination and frustration. She stopped only a few feet from him, studying him the way a scientist studies a creature that breaks every rule of nature, and Rylan held her gaze without flinching. Without blinking, almost without breathing. "You confuse me," she said finally, her voice soft but edged like a blade gliding across glass. "Humans are loud, emotional, unstable, weak under pressure. Your kind shakes when you see the edge of a blade, yet you stand before death without fear." Rylan tilted his head slightly. "Maybe your expectations are wrong," he said quietly, and something about his tone made her blink once slowly. As if she wasn't used to a prisoner speaking to her like an equal, she circled him again, the sound of her armor brushing against the cold metal floor filling the room with soft echoes. And every time she moved behind him, he felt her presence like a weight on the back of his mind. "You believe Vorgath refused to kill you because you are strong," she said. "But monsters do not fear humans," Rylan didn't answer. Because he knew she wasn't asking a question. She was challenging him, pushing him, trying to force him into revealing something, anything. She pressed a button on her wrist device and a barrier lowered around him, leaving him exposed inside a circle of shimmering purple light, the air vibrating softly as the machine activated. "This chamber measures biological stress," she said. "Your heart rate, your mind state, your fear levels." Rylan raised an eyebrow slightly. "Trying to find what makes me tick," he murmured. And Zirathel paused, almost surprised by his casual tone. "I am trying to understand why you are different," she corrected. "No human should stand so still before death. No human should remain calm in my presence. No human should make my war beast hesitate." Rylan's jaw tightened slightly, the first sign of emotion since she captured him, and she noticed it instantly, her eyes narrowing with sudden interest. "So you do feel something," she whispered, stepping closer, her voice softer than before. "Tell me, human, what holds you together?" Rylan stared forward for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she didn't expect. "Pain," he said, "more than your tests can show." For the first time, Zirathel didn't have a reply. She simply watched him with a strange flicker in her eyes, something she herself didn't fully understand before she could speak again. A loud hiss echoed through the room as a side door opened and two guards entered, pushing a small cage made of bone-like metal. Inside the cage, a smaller creature twisted violently, snarling with razor-sharp fangs and glowing red eyes, its body trembling with hunger and hatred. Zirathel stepped aside and gestured toward the cage, her expression shifting into something colder, something royal, something dangerous. "This creature follows no commands," she said. "Not mine, not my father's, not even Vorgath's. It kills anything within reach." Rylan didn't react, his breathing steady, his eyes calm. She pressed a button and the cage opened, releasing the creature into the chamber, its legs pounding against the floor as it rushed straight at Rylan with a scream that echoed like tearing metal. The guards stepped back, prepared to watch the human be shredded to pieces. Zirathel watched with a breath she didn't realize she was holding. The creature leaped with full force, jaws wide open, claws slicing through the air, its entire body aimed to rip him apart. But just inches before reaching Rylan, it froze, its body jerked, its breath hitched. Its claws trembled mid-air, and a low, confused whine came from its throat, like a frightened animal trying to understand its own fear. Zirathel stepped forward, her face tightening with shock. "What did you do?" she whispered. Rylan slowly lifted his gaze to meet hers, and for a moment the world around them went silent. "I didn't do anything," he said quietly. "Your creatures simply sense the truth." "And what truth is that?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "That I'm not the one who should be afraid," he murmured. A cold shiver ran across Zirathel's skin, something deeper than curiosity now taking root inside her, something like instinct whispering that this human was more dangerous than any monster she commanded. And as she stared at him in that dim chamber filled with pulsing alien light, she understood one thing clearly. This human was going to change her fate, whether she wanted it or not. The beast's secret and Rylan's hidden past, the small creature crawled backward, trembling violently as if the very air around Rylan was pushing it away, and when it finally collapsed into a shaking heap at the far corner, the entire chamber felt colder, heavier, filled with a silence that did not belong to the Dominion. Zirathel stared at the scene with wide eyes, her breath slipping out slowly as if her body was trying to accept something her mind refused to believe. And Rylan simply stood there, chained to the pillar, breathing steadily as if the moment meant nothing to him. But deep in his gaze something shifted, a faint flicker of memory stirring like smoke rising from hidden embers. Something he had tried hard to bury. The princess walked closer, her steps cautious now, not out of fear for herself but out of disbelief that something she had spent her life mastering, the art of control, was slipping from her fingers because of one quiet human. "Explain yourself," she said, her voice softer than the command she intended. "What are you hiding?" Rylan met her eyes, and there was a tiredness in his expression that didn't match his age, a weight that spoke of ruined pasts and battles that never truly ended. "You're asking the wrong question," he murmured. "You should ask what you're seeing," she frowned, a spark of frustration lighting in her chest, because she didn't like riddles and she didn't like being made to feel small. Yet there was something about the way he spoke that made her feel as if she was standing on the edge of a truth larger than her empire. She turned her gaze toward the trembling creature, her voice dropping into a whisper she didn't intend to release. "No monster has ever feared a human." Rylan's chains clinked softly as he shifted his weight, the slightest hint of pain passing through his posture. "No monster fears humans," he said quietly. "But they fear what lives inside me." The words hit her like a cold wind from a dying star, and before she could respond, the door of the chamber burst open and High Warlord Krythos marched in, his armor decorated with bone plates and burning red symbols, his eyes filled with enough hatred to set galaxies on fire. "Princess," he snapped, ignoring the formalities he usually respected. "We cannot allow this creature to stay alive. The council demands his execution." Zirathel's expression sharpened instantly, a storm rising behind her eyes. "You enter my chamber without permission," she said, her voice smooth but deadly. "You forget your place." Krythos clenched his jaw, but he did not back down, because fear for the Dominion outweighed fear of her wrath. "Your Highness, Vorgath refused your command." The testing beast refused to kill him, and now every soldier whispers that this human carries cursed power. If the Dominion sees this as weakness, rebellions will rise across the sectors. Rylan watched them quietly, his face unreadable, his presence strangely calm in the middle of their growing tension. Zirathel stepped between Rylan and the warlord, her armor brushing lightly against the shimmering barrier, her eyes burning with defiance. "This human is mine," she said, her tone leaving no space for argument. "You will not touch him." Krythos took one slow step forward, lowering his voice as he spoke. "Your fascination blinds you, Princess. You forget that humans are unpredictable, dangerous, and too brave for their own good. They burn worlds simply because someone told them they couldn't." Rylan gave a faint smile at that, one the warlord did not appreciate. "Enough," Zirathel snapped. "Leave." But Krythos didn't move, his gaze now fixed on Rylan with pure hatred. "You are a threat to my people," he said, "and threats must be erased." Before the princess could stop him, Krythos drew a blade charged with red electric light and hurled it straight at Rylan's chest. The weapon screamed through the air with deadly speed, and the guards gasped as it closed the distance in a heartbeat. But something impossible happened again. Vorgath, who was being kept behind the reinforced glass wall of the corridor, smashed his massive body against it with a roar so powerful the walls cracked. the sound shaking the entire floor as the monster reacted to Ryland's danger with a fury no one could explain. The blade froze mid-air inches before Ryland, trapped in a sudden pulse of invisible force that rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. The princess stumbled back, her eyes wide in disbelief as she watched the weapon drop harmlessly to the floor. Ryland lowered his head slightly, not in exhaustion but in something almost like regret. "Killing me won't solve your fear," he said quietly, "because your fear is not of me, but of what your empire created." Kratos stared at him with confusion and hatred warring in his eyes. "What did we create?" he growled. Ryland looked up, and for the first time Zirathel saw something raw and painful behind his eyes, something that made her heart tighten with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. "You experimented on humans," Ryland whispered. "Project Sentinel, a program your scientists believed would create warriors capable of resisting alien influence. Most of us died. A few survived, but none left unchanged." Zirathel's breath caught in her throat because she knew that name. It was buried in classified Dominion records she was never allowed to read. "You were part of it," she whispered. Ryland nodded once, slowly. "And the creatures know what I am," he said, "because they were designed from the same darkness that changed me." A long silence filled the chamber, thick with tension, fear, and something darker. Zirathel looked at Ryland with a new understanding, a new awareness that felt heavy and electric at the same time. "You are bonded to them," she said softly. "The monsters recognize you." Ryland held her gaze. "They recognize the broken parts," he said, "because those parts were born from them." Her heart tightened, because suddenly the chain of events made sense. The hesitations, the fear, the strange pull between Ryland and the beasts. This human wasn't just different. He was dangerous in a way their empire had never prepared for. And yet something inside her whispered that she needed him. Not as a prisoner, not as an experiment, but as something far more important. And that thought terrified her in ways she couldn't name. A failed execution and the first alliance. The next few hours moved like a storm with no warning. And even Ryland, calm as he appeared, could feel the shift in the air as the Dominion Palace changed around him. The walls buzzing with whispers, footsteps crossing corridors in frantic haste, guards rushing to places they shouldn't be. Yet the one thing he noticed more than anything was the absence of Princess Zirathel's presence. She had left the chamber without a word, her expression carved from confusion and fear, and something no one in the Dominion had ever witnessed inside her eyes before. And Ryland knew the council would not waste this moment of weakness. He didn't have long to wait. The chamber doors burst open with a violent hiss, and High Warlord Kratos stormed in with a squad of elite guards, their armor glowing red with authority, as they surrounded Ryland like vultures closing in on a wounded prey. "Remove him," Kratos ordered, his voice echoing with cold certainty. "The princess has lost perspective. The Dominion must not." Ryland didn't fight as they unchained him, didn't resist as they shackled his hands behind his back, didn't speak as they shoved him through the corridors. But inside his chest something old and dangerous stirred, something that whispered warnings he tried to ignore. They led him through deeper tunnels carved from volcanic stone and lined with golden symbols of victory, but the air here was heavier, hotter, carrying the scent of blood and old battles. And Ryland knew exactly where they were taking him, the Dominion Arena. A place where executions weren't punishments but entertainment. A place where death echoed louder than the crowd. When the heavy doors opened and the bright red light spilled across his face, Ryland stepped into the arena floor with slow, steady steps, the ground stained by centuries of agony, the stands filled with soldiers, nobles, and council members eager to watch the human die. The roar of the crowd crashed like thunder across the arena. But even through the chaos, Ryland's gaze lifted to the elevated throne where Zirathel usually stood, and his heart tightened when he saw her seat empty. Kratos stepped forward, raising his arm to silence the crowd, his voice booming like a hammer striking steel. "This human has corrupted our beasts, defied our authority, and infected our princess with dangerous curiosity," he shouted. "Today, we reclaim our strength with blood." The arena's walls trembled as massive gates opened on the far side, and the heavy thud of monstrous footsteps echoed like falling meteors. Vorgath emerged from the shadows, chains around his limbs glowing with fiery light, his eyes burning with rage and confusion as he scanned the arena until they met Ryland's. Ryland inhaled slowly, because he could feel the monster's pain, the way its muscles twitched from electric shocks, the way its breathing staggered from being forced into this fight. Krythos lifted a control rod glowing with red commands. "Vorgath!" he shouted. "Devour the human!" But Vorgath didn't move. Not an inch, the crowd murmured in confusion, unsure if they were witnessing hesitation or rebellion. Krythos snarled, slamming the command rod into the ground, sending a violent surge through the chains, forcing the monster to roar in agony and stumble forward. Still, it did not attack. Instead, its massive head lowered, its body trembling as it tried to resist the command, its claws dragging across the ground as if fighting against an invisible anchor pulling it back. Rylan took one slow step forward, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. "You don't want this," he whispered, and though his words were soft, they carried across the arena like a forbidden truth. The monster trembled, its red eyes flickering with something almost like fear, almost like recognition. Krythos screamed in frustration, "Obey your command! Kill him!" More electricity surged through Vorgath's body, ripping a tortured roar from its throat, forcing it to lunge forward, its claws slicing the air centimeters from Rylan's chest. But the moment the beast reached him, Rylan didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't raise a hand. He simply met the creature's eyes with a calmness no living thing should have possessed in that moment. Vorgath froze mid-attack, its claws hovering in the air, its breath shaking like a volcano trying not to erupt. The crowd gasped as the monster slowly lowered its arm, stepping back until it stood between Rylan and the soldiers, shielding him with its massive body. Krythos's face twisted in shock and rage, and he drew his blade, shouting, "The beast has turned feral! Kill them both!" Before the soldiers could advance, a deafening sound pierced the arena, a sound like the crack of a star collapsing, and the arena doors exploded open as Princess Zirathel marched in, surrounded only by her personal guard. Her eyes burned with fire brighter than any Dominion torch as she stormed forward, her voice shaking the walls when she shouted, "Stop!" Every soldier froze in place, the crowd falling into absolute silence as she stepped onto the arena floor with a fury that made even Krythos step back. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Krythos straightened, trying to mask his fear. "I corrected your mistake, Princess. This human is too dangerous. You were too blinded by curiosity to see it." Zirathel walked past him, her gaze never leaving Rylan, and when she reached him she paused, staring at the giant monster shielding him like a loyal guardian. "Vorgath protects you," she whispered, her voice soft with awe. "It protects no one." Rylan stood silent, his expression unreadable, his body still steady despite standing on the brink of execution just moments ago. Krythos lifted his blade again, desperation twisting his movements. "This ends now," he shouted. But Zirathel moved faster than anyone expected, her own blade igniting with blue fire as she struck his weapon aside with a force that sent sparks flying into the air. She placed herself between Rylan and Krythos, her voice sharp enough to cut the world in half. "No one touches him," she said, "not without going through me." Gasps echoed through the arena, because the princess had never protected a prisoner, never defied her counsel, never chosen instinct over law. Krythos stared at her with disbelief. "You risk the Dominion for a human," he spat. Zirathel didn't look away from Rylan when she answered. "I follow the truth," she said quietly. "And the truth stands with him." The arena felt like it stopped breathing as she reached for Rylan's arm and whispered, "Come with me." And for the first time since his capture, Rylan nodded, and for the first time in her life, Zirathel felt afraid not of losing power but of losing him. Escape from the Dominion. The arena had never witnessed silence like this, a silence so thick it almost pressed against the skin, and as Zirathel took Rylan's arm and led him across the blood-stained sand, the soldiers did not move. The crowd did not breathe. Even Vorgath stood still with the intensity of a creature that understood the universe had just shifted beneath its feet. Rylan's steps were steady but slow, his body tense with the awareness that any wrong movement could spark another explosion of violence. Yet the princess walked beside him with a fierce certainty, her hand gripping his wrist like it was the only thing anchoring her to her own choice. Once they reached the edge of the arena floor, she turned sharply and barked an order to her guards. "Seal the gates and protect the human," and though her voice trembled with emotion, it carried the authority of someone who had never been disobeyed before. But the Dominion Council had no intention of surrendering their control so easily. Before her guards could act, alarms erupted across the arena like storm sirens screaming through metal, red lights flashing across the walls as heavy blast doors began to lower from the ceiling. trapping them inside. Krethos shouted commands from the opposite side, summoning reinforcements as elite soldiers began pouring into the arena from every passage, their weapons glowing with brutal purpose. Zirathel grabbed Ryland's arm tighter, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Run with me." And before he could answer, she pulled him toward a side exit that only royal blood could open. A narrow corridor hidden behind a panel marked with ancient Dominion symbols. Vorgath roared behind them, smashing into the soldiers who tried to block their escape, his massive claws tearing through metal and bone as he carved a path for them with terrifying devotion. And Ryland felt a strange ache in his chest watching the beast fight for him, as if something deep inside him recognized the creature's loyalty like a forgotten memory resurfacing. They sprinted down the corridor as doors sealed behind them, Zirathel breathing hard, her heart pounding with fear she didn't want to admit, and Ryland's footsteps echoing with calm determination, as if his instincts had already begun guiding him through danger. When the corridor ended, they reached an enormous chamber glowing with green light, filled with pipes, machinery, and the quiet hum of the palace's underground ventilation systems. And Zirathel slammed her hand on a control panel to lower a hidden bridge that extended over a chasm, glowing with molten metal far below. "Where exactly are we going?" Ryland asked, though his tone remained steady even as the bridge shook beneath their feet. "To the biolabs," she answered, her breath short, her eyes sharp. "It's the only place the council won't search immediately." Ryland raised an eyebrow as they ran. "Because it's dangerous. Extremely," she replied. "But that danger might help us survive." The moment they crossed the bridge, heavy metal doors sealed behind them, sealing out the echo of faraway battles as soldiers and beasts clashed in the arena above, and the flickering lights of the lower levels painted everything in cold blue and sickly green. The biolabs were nothing like the throne chamber, nothing like the polished glory of Dominion power. They were carved from raw stone and metal, filled with tanks of glowing fluid, broken prototypes, half-finished experiments, and the lingering scent of chemical death. Ryland slowed his steps, taking in the sight of creatures that looked like nightmares trapped in glass, some floating, some snarling silently, some still twitching as if life refused to release them completely. Zirathel's voice softened as she walked beside him. "This is where Vorgath was born," she said. "This is where every Dominion war beast begins its life." Ryland looked at one tank containing a creature with sharp spines and hollow eyes, and something in him tightened with recognition, a faint flicker of pain racing through his chest. "You're remembering something," Zirathel said quietly. Watching him carefully, Ryland swallowed hard, his breath shaky for the first time since she had met him. "I've seen this," he whispered. "Not this room, but something like it in the human facilities. During the experiments." She stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "Tell me." Ryland leaned a hand against a cold steel railing, his eyes lowered as memories he had buried began rising like ghosts he could no longer outrun. "They strapped us to tables," he said softly. "They injected us with compounds taken from captured beasts. They made us breathe spores extracted from creatures like these. They tried to force our bodies to adapt to fear, to darkness, to instincts that weren't human." Zirathel's breath trembled, because she had known humans experimented on themselves, but she had never imagined the brutality of it. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would your people do this?" Ryland looked at her with eyes filled with a grief older than his years. "Humanity was losing too many wars," he said. "We were desperate, and desperation makes monsters out of both sides." For a moment, Zirathel said nothing, her heart twisting with something painfully unfamiliar, something she didn't know how to name before she could respond. The lab's alarm light suddenly turned red, and a robotic voice echoed through the chamber. "Unauthorized presence detected. Containment breach initiated. Releasing prototypes." Zirathel's eyes widened as cages began unlocking one by one, the metallic clang echoing like a countdown to death. "Ryland," she breathed, stepping closer to him instinctively. "They're going to release everything on this floor to kill us." Ryland's expression hardened, his calm shifting into something sharper and colder. "Then we survive," he said, "the same way we have survived everything else." And as the cages burst open and twisted creatures crawled into the glowing light, Ryland reached out and took Zirathel's hand. Not because she commanded him, not because she needed him, but because he refused to let her face the darkness alone, the human's awakening power. The lights in the biolabs flickered like dying stars as the cages burst open one after another, and creatures twisted from bones, shadows, and venomous instincts crawled into the open, their eyes glowing with hunger and confusion, each one sensing the unfamiliar presence of a human and the familiar bloodline of their Dominion princess. Zirathel tightened her grip on Ryland's hand, not in fear but in something deeper, something instinctive, and the warmth of his fingers wrapped around hers sent a strange pulse through her chest, a pulse that made the world around her feel both more dangerous and more alive. Ryland stepped in front of her without hesitation, his body angled as if he had trained his whole life to shield someone, yet his movements carried no arrogance, no bravado, only a quiet determination born from a lifetime of surviving places like this. The creatures hissed and screeched, their claws clicking against the metal floor as they surrounded the pair, their bodies shaking with the rush of being released, driven by instincts that had no reason, no mercy. Zirathel reached for her blade, but Ryland gently touched her arm, shaking his head with a calmness that made her breath catch. "Don't," he murmured. "If you attack, they'll frenzy." She stared at him, stunned by the certainty in his voice. "How do you know that?" she whispered. Ryland didn't answer with words. He simply closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, as if allowing something inside him to awaken, something that had been waiting under the surface like a sleeping storm. The creatures all paused at the same time, their snarls breaking into uncertain whimpers, their heads tilting as if hearing a sound no one else could hear. Zirathel felt it too, a faint pulse in the air, like the deep rhythm of a heartbeat that wasn't hers, wasn't Ryland's, but belonged to something ancient and buried inside him. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and awe. Ryland opened his eyes slowly, and for a moment she saw something different in them, a faint golden shimmer like light trying to break through darkness. "I'm not doing anything," he said softly. "They're just listening." The largest of the prototypes stepped forward, its body towering twice Ryland's height, its jaw dripping with glowing saliva that sizzled on the floor, yet instead of leaping it lowered its head toward him, sniffing the air with curiosity rather than aggression. Zirathel felt her breath freeze in her chest. "No Dominion beast listens," she whispered in disbelief. "They don't understand calm. They don't understand hesitation." Ryland touched his chest lightly as if feeling the echo of something deep within him. "They understand resonance," he said. "They feel what I feel, the fear, the pain, the connection." The word caught in his throat and she understood why, because the pain of Project Sentinel wasn't just memory. It was alive inside him, carved into his very blood. One of the creatures hissed and moved closer to Zirathel, its eyes narrowing with suspicion, and before she could react, Ryland stepped between them with a speed that shocked even her. "Back," he whispered, not as a command but as a plea. The creature backed away immediately, its claws dragging softly across the floor as if bowing to him. Zirathel stared at him with wide eyes, her voice breaking into a shaken whisper. "You're controlling them." Ryland shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "I'm connecting with them. The same way they were connected to me in the experiments." Before she could reply, a violent tremor shook the entire lab, dust falling from the ceiling, machinery sparking as emergency systems struggled to stay online. A distant explosion echoed through the underground tunnels, followed by the unmistakable roar of Dominion warships charging their cannons. "They're firing on the lower levels," Zirathel gasped, her eyes widening as realization struck. "They want to collapse the labs on top of us." Ryland grabbed her hand again, pulling her away from the approaching prototypes. "Then we need to move," he said. "Now." But as they ran deeper into the maze of machinery, something else began to stir inside Ryland. A pulse, a warmth, a rising pressure behind his ribs like energy building inside a sealed vessel. The creatures followed them at a distance, not attacking but watching with strange loyalty, and Ryland could feel their fear, their pain, their instinctive pull toward him like a bond none of them could break. They reached a massive circular chamber at the heart of the labs, its center dominated by an ancient human relic, an artifact built long before the Dominion's rise, a floating metallic sphere covered in glowing lines and old human markings. Zirathel's heart slammed against her ribs. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Human relics don't activate near Dominion blood." Ryland stared at the relic with widening eyes, because the moment he stepped into the chamber, the sphere pulsed with golden light, humming like a dormant sun awakening after centuries of silence. Zirathel stepped back, fear and wonder mixing in her gaze. "It's responding to you," she breathed. "Why is it responding to you?" Ryland's breath shook as the golden pulse reached him. passing through his body like a wave and ripping open memories he had tried to bury. Memories of scientists whispering that some humans were meant to awaken ancient technology, memories of pain screaming through his veins as they tested him again and again. The relic pulsed brighter, the light reflecting across the walls, and every creature in the room bowed its head at the same time as if acknowledging a forgotten king. Rylan staggered, dropping to one knee as the energy inside him surged. Zirathel rushed to his side, her hands gripping his shoulders, her voice trembling. "Rylan, what's happening to you?" His voice was barely a whisper. "The power they forced into me. It's waking up." The relic flared with blinding golden light, shaking the entire chamber, and in that blinding moment, Zirathel understood one terrifying truth. Rylan wasn't just surviving their experiments. He was becoming something the Dominion never intended to create. Something the Dominion could never control. And as the chamber shook around them, she held onto him tightly, her heart whispering a truth she didn't want to face. If Rylan didn't learn to control this power, it would either save them all or destroy everything she had ever known. The final stand in the new future. The sky above the Dominion's capital was ripped open with fire as warships hovered like predators over the city, their engines roaring and casting red and gold reflections across the metallic spires below. Zirathel stood at the edge of the shattered plaza, her eyes scanning the horizon for the enemy fleet while her fingers gripped Rylan's hand, grounding herself against the storm of chaos that had become their world. Rylan's breathing was steady, but his chest rose and fell with the rhythm of a power waking fully inside him, his eyes glimmering with golden light that reflected not just the relic's energy, but something older, deeper, and terrifying. Behind them, Vorgath's massive form towered like a living fortress, muscles rippling beneath bone plates as the creature growled low in its throat. A warning not just to the Dominion forces but to the universe itself. The first wave of attack descended, monstrous ships bristling with weapons and energy pulses firing in arcs that scorched the air. Zirathel's voice broke through the roar of engines and explosions, trembling but firm. "Rylan, now!" He didn't hesitate, stepping forward with his eyes closed for a moment, feeling the pulse of the relic, feeling the resonance of every living creature around him, feeling the fear, the rage, and the loyalty coursing through Vorgath and the released lab beasts. The golden light surged from his body, spreading outward in a wave that resonated with the alien technology of the enemy fleet, disrupting targeting systems, shutting down shields, and twisting the energy of weapons until they fizzled harmlessly in the sky. The soldiers on the ground froze, some dropping to their knees, others staring wide-eyed at the human who had defied every law of biology, engineering, and war. Zirathel felt a swell of pride and fear collide in her chest, because the human who hadn't trembled in her throne room now commanded the battlefield with the force of a god. Vorgath leaped into the air, smashing through enemy dropships with claws and jaws, while Rylan extended his hands and the creatures from the labs obeyed not through chains but through instinct. Forming a living wall of fury around him and Zirathel, the Council had arrived in their flagship, the largest war vessel the Dominion had ever built, and from its core emerged a creature of legend, a super beast born from Vorgath's own bloodline and engineered for total destruction. Rylan's eyes glimmered with recognition, a mixture of fear, understanding, and raw determination. "This ends now," he whispered to Zirathel, who nodded, her silver blue hair catching the light of explosions and flame. He stepped forward and the energy around him condensed into a golden storm. Vibrating through every inch of the ground and sky, Vorgath roared in support, launching itself toward the super beast with the fury of a creature protecting its master, and the other creatures followed like a tidal wave of teeth, claws, and bioluminescent terror. The super beast collided with Vorgath in a cataclysmic impact, the shockwave shattering windows, bending steel, and sending the soldiers of the Council sprawling across the plaza. Rylan raised his arms, closing his eyes, feeling every pulse of energy, every heartbeat of creatures around him, every vibration in the air and ground, until a focused surge of power shot through his body and into the battlefield. Amplifying Vorgath's strength and the instincts of the other beasts, the super beast screeched, a sound of pure rage and disbelief as it realized its master was not commanding it, but fighting against it, guided by a human whose courage defied reason. Zirathel leaped into the fray beside him, her blade glowing with blue energy, striking at the Council officers trying to regain control, moving with a grace born of desperation and authority. The battle twisted into chaos and beauty at the same time, explosions erupting around them, creatures colliding mid-air, lasers and energy pulses crossing like threads of fire in the sky. Ryland's power intensified. The golden storm now surrounding him, Vorgath and Zirathel, creating a sphere of resonance that protected them and amplified the natural instincts of every allied creature. With one final surge, Ryland reached into the super beast's mind, not to kill but to disrupt, to show it a vision of loyalty and protection rather than blind obedience and rage. The creature froze, then fell to its knees, bowing to Ryland and Vorgath alike, its immense body trembling as if understanding for the first time what it meant to obey compassion rather than fear. The Council flagship's systems overloaded and erupted in fire as their command structure collapsed, ships crashing into each other, energy weapons tearing themselves apart in arcs of raw power. Zirathel stood beside Ryland, her breath heavy, her hand still gripping his, her eyes wide with awe and disbelief. "You did it," she whispered, a smile breaking across her face for the first time in days. "You saved us." Ryland's golden eyes softened, exhaustion finally touching him, and he let himself look at her, seeing not just the princess or the enemy of his past, but the woman who had stood with him, trusted him, and faced the impossible by his side. "We saved each other," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the still smoking plaza. "And maybe this world too." Vorgath lowered its massive head, letting out a victorious roar that echoed across the capital, and the other creatures followed, howling and growling in triumph, the resonance of their loyalty singing through the city. Zirathel looked at Ryland, her heart pounding, knowing that the future had changed, that the Dominion could no longer command fear with brutality alone, that a human had shown them a new way, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel hope. The smoke cleared, the fires burned low, and as the citizens of the capital emerged from hiding, they saw a scene they would never forget. A human standing among monsters and a princess, victorious, unbroken, and alive. Ryland turned to Zirathel, his eyes softening. "You asked once why I didn't tremble," he said quietly. "I suppose the answer is, fear has nothing on purpose, nothing on truth, nothing on standing for what matters." Zirathel reached out, her hand brushing his cheek, her voice trembling. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "the galaxy is finally ready to see humans for what they can be." And in that moment, with the remnants of war behind them, the human, the princess, and the beast stood together, their bond unbroken, their future uncertain but full of possibility. The Dominion would never forget this day, the day the human did not tremble, and perhaps neither would the universe.